It's June 2020. My name is Bettina Hardy and I'm really privileged and honoured to be speaking with Rebecca Lim today. The topic of our conversations are going to be around Australia's immigration policy, the Manus story 2013 to 2020. Rebecca is a human rights advocate and has dedicated much of her life to the pursuit of rights for those seeking asylum or refuge. She was awarded the UN Association of Australia Queensland Meritorious Award, recognising her dedication and contribution in raising awareness and promoting human rights, especially for asylum seekers within Australia and overseas, and that was in 2014. And she definitely deserves to continue to own that award. What Rebecca does is not in the limelight, it's in the shadows and is often silent. This series of conversations about Australia's immigration policy are focused on the work that Rebecca has done, what she has seen and heard in an attempt to bring to light the voices and experiences of the people who are voiceless and stateless. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you, Fatina.
How did you get involved in this area of work? What was your inspiration?
Yeah, sure. I kind of recall my first experience working with people from refugee backgrounds when I applied for a job in Singapore in 1979. I had grown up there. I was born in Australia, grew up in Singapore. And this was the United States Refugee Program based in Singapore. They were sending workers out to Indonesia, in Pulau Galang, which is a refugee camp in Indonesia. This was at a time when the Indo-Chinese refugees were fleeing Vietnam. So I applied for a clerical job. After 6 months, got bored with it, as I do, and made friends with some of the expats, as we call them, expatriates. So they were non-Singapore citizens, field workers, I guess, with experience in this field, and hooked up with, made friends with an Australian field worker. Mm-hmm. And I forget her name now, so I hope she doesn't hear this. So I kind of said, can I learn from you? Can I go to the refugee camp, etc., etc.? So after 6 months, I kind of was allowed to do that. Mm-hmm. So that experience kind of stayed with me. We flew out by helicopter to Pulau Galang, Indonesia, and came back, by boat and flights, all that kind of stuff. So after kind of carrying her bags for a little bit and doing some admin work, I was able to do my own cases, if you like, which was quite good. And this was at a time where there was truly a regional resettlement program, I guess, and there were 4 refugee camps in Southeast Asia. There was Indonesia, Malaysia, Hong Kong, and the Philippines. Okay. And there were 5 resettlement countries who had put up their hands to resettle Indo-Chinese refugees. Australia was one of them. Mm-hmm. And so was the US, Canada, Sweden, and I always forget the last country. Could be New Zealand, could be somewhere else, could be UK, who knows? But my caseload would kind of focus on people going to California. Everybody wanted to go to California for the sunshine. So I guess priority 1 was people who had family members there, and then, so on and so forth after that. So Australia probably took up to 100,000 Indo-Chinese refugees, I understand. So I kind of did that for 18 months. And then got married, got pregnant, had the children, all this kind of jazz, and got back into a similar kind of role after I finished my master's, which was in 2000. So I worked with the Red Cross as a settlement information officer. Mm-hmm. And that was at the time, we still have the humanitarian offshore visa program. So Australia was accepting refugees from the former Yugoslavia, Iraq, and Afghanistan. So that was kind of my caseload. Okay. It was really not migration related, it was settlement related. So I used to help them, understand Australian law and Medicare and education, all that kind of settlement stuff, right?
So just to be clear, so the settlement is they've been granted refugee status and now it's settling into Australia?
That's right. That's Australia's offshore humanitarian program.
Thank you.
So people were granted visas and then kind of flew in. They had 6 weeks of accommodation at flats across Brisbane and settlement information officers. So I was kind of one of them. Mm-hmm. Then after that, I joined the Department of Immigration as an immigration officer.
What was that like?
It was a good experience, learning how the wheels of government worked, learning how to make legally sound decisions, So there was no refugee processing or assessment of claims in the Brisbane office at the time. We're talking about 2002 to 2007, which is when I was an immigration officer. So I kind of did a whole heap of other visas, student visas and work visas, spouse visas, a bit of compliance work. I got a deployment to the airport and I said, no, not going to the airport. So kind of did that until I, again, got bored. And there was very limited prospects in the regional office. So if you want an overseas posting, you kind of had to go to Canberra, and, that kind of, yeah. So I kind of left anyway.
Tell me about how you've become involved in the current work that you're doing now with the hub at Indooroopilly.
So I'll take a step back. After I left immigration, I registered as a migration agent, did some kind of private work where I had a business, and then I started the onshore deployments, which is where I went to detention centres across Australia, Christmas Island, Darwin, so on and so forth, as a contracted migration agent. And my role was to help people prepare an application for asylum. So do the forms, do a statement, and then go to represent them at an immigration assessment interview. So I kind of did that for a while, 2010 to 2012, 13. And then policies kind of changed. Then I worked for Romero Centre, which was quite a critical time because people were being released from detention with no work rights and very minimum Centrelink support, which is where I met you. And we kind of had a bit of relationship there going in terms of students and research and so on and so forth. So it was a good time to be at Romero Centre at the time. And then while I was at the Romero Centre, I also kind of started doing work at Manus Island as a migration agent. But I won't talk about that because kind of we signed agreements. So that was from 2014 to mid-2016.
Okay, yes. And so, and I recall that when you were working at Romero Centre, one of the things that you and the team used to talk a lot about was that this was the kind of the last place that people could actually go to for support because there was nowhere else to go. Is that?
Yeah, I guess at the time, there was some policy change. If you arrived by boat after 12th of August 2012, the whole policy was Operation Sovereign Borders kind of thing, no advantage policy. So people were released from detention centre into the community and you actually had to wait for the minister to invite you to make an application. They had no work rights. So Romero Centre became and has always been, I guess, a place of welcome, a place for people seeking asylum to just drop in, cook food, engage, have friendship, that kind of thing. Yeah. And so at the time when I was started as a volunteer and then became the community engagement coordinator, my job was to kind of care for them, in whatever way possible, do some migration work, also community information awareness. I've calculated I did 60 speaking engagements in 18 months.
Wow.
That's a lot of work. But
yes.
That's, there's a lot of goodwill
yes.
for people who supported the Romero Centre, parish, faith-based and non-faith-based group, community groups, individuals, so on and so forth. And then, and people wanted to, not everyone has the opportunity to engage with a person from refugee or asylum-seeking background. So that was an opportunity for people to kind of understand. And policy is so confusing. I think immigration policy is the second most confusing piece of legislation after tax. I think tax is the most confusing. Yeah. And probably accountants agree with me. And then immigration policy chops and changes. Yes. That's the act, there's the regulations, there's policy and in bridging visas. What does all that mean kind of thing?
And there's been a lot of changes to policy and I'd like us to talk about that. But before we do that, perhaps you can just tell us a little bit then about, so you left Romero, you did some migration work, migration agent work, and then you helped set up this amazing hub at Indooroopilly. Can you tell us about that?
This hub is indeed amazing. After 5 years at Romero Centre, I left to kind of move on and do, when I say other things, it's not really other things, it's the same things. So I approached my friends at Indooroopilly Uniting Church and said, I'm leaving Romero. Can we set something up here because we kind of need to help people apply for their files through freedom of information and fill in forms as needed, so on and so forth. So that was like maybe 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. And it's become such a vibrant hub. It's kind of the place to be. We are open Mondays and not Mondays, Thursdays and Saturdays, 2 to 5. I'm getting very tired because this is such a terrible time in policy at the moment. Yes. But we've remained open through COVID because we're an essential service, although we kind of, we're doing all the health precautions, wiping services, hand sanitizers, contact tracing, all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
So we have been offering migration assistance in terms of filling in forms, FOIs, helping people to renew Medicare cards and IMI cards, and some people want access to superannuation. Some people have no option but to return home or face being deported. So we kind of have those conversations if we need to. And some of us have expertise in various countries and links and networks in various countries. So we try our best kind of to help people. And we never know whether people are safe. And this is the policy, I guess. If Australia says, I believe that you will be safe when you return home, and therefore I'm not granting you a protection visa, there is no monitoring of people's safety once they return home. No. And immigration has told us, well, they can't really monitor people in another country. So I'm just a bit confused about that. On one hand, you say it's safe for you to go home, so we're not giving you a protection visa. On the other hand, there is no monitoring.
So we don't actually know what happens to the people?
No, we don't. People who do voluntarily return through IOM, International Organization for Migration, and who choose to engage or maintain contact with IOM for, I think, 6 months is what they're allowed to maintain contact. Some don't for fear of government authorities on the ground. But those who maintain contact, I understand IOM prepares a report which is not publicly available. So we're kind of not really sure what that report is all about.
No.
Yeah.
And does that worry you?
Yes, of course, because we kind of need to know if it's safe and what's the scope of the engagement with IOM, what is IOM found, what is actually happening on the ground. In fact, for Sri Lanka, which is kind of my specialist area, we are getting more current and more useful information on the ground from the lawyers on the ground, from the advocates on the ground, from the clerics on the ground, who are telling us what's actually really happening.
And is that something you want to expand on?
Oh, look, Sri Lanka continues to perpetrate human rights abuses, end of story. We've got so many reports that that's happening in the country. The election of the new president, who's the brother of the former 2 presidents ago, has created a lot of fear in the community, not just with Tamils, but with the Sinhalese majority community who are human rights workers, who are outspoken, and lawyers, and even priests, who, no one is really prepared to say anything. And then, of course, the mothers of the disappeared. There are thousands and thousands of people who remain disappeared and missing.
Yes. So
we're kind of not sure where that's all, what is really happening there. But we kind of know things are not good on the ground. But, yeah.
And so is that one of the reasons, I guess, that, really inspires you and everyone else at the Hub to just keep working hard to try and support the people who are here in Australia to remain here?
Yes, of course. With the policy change, with the fast track, which is the current system of assessment for people who arrive by boat after that cutoff date in 2012, it's just, we're seeing higher rates of refusals of protection visas, and and that particular group of people, we call the legacy caseload, are not able to access the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, the AAT. They go to another form of review. I won't even call it a proper merits review. It's the IAA, Independent Assessment Authority, where you can't present new information. You don't really have a face-to-face interview. So it's kind of really, we're finding, we don't think it's, it might be legally sound according to the legislation, but I don't think it really assesses people's claims properly. And of course, Australia and Sri Lanka have this agreement, geopolitical, mutually beneficial relationship. That means that if you don't voluntarily return, you can be deported. That's a bit different with other countries. So I got involved and wanted to specialize in Tamil cases. Not that I don't have other clients, I've got clients from everywhere else. Yes. But I remember meeting Father Pan Jordan, who's a Tamil Catholic priest, a Dominican priest, who himself comes from a refugee background, and then reading, some other policies that were affecting mainly Tamils, but also Sinhalese, I guess Sri Lankan refugees quite adversely. And I thought, I want to explore this a bit more because I just felt that one of the worst groups to be discriminated, aside from the Vietnamese, really. That's another country that Australia can deport to Vietnam. There are many other countries that kind of don't accept people who are forced, are removed. Immigration says removed, we say deported.
Right. And if we just come back, I mean, and I think it'd be fascinating for us to talk further about that, perhaps a little bit later or in another session. But if we come back to the hub, so one of the things that you do here, it's become more than just obviously form filling and advocacy. You've been able to amass this support network here that comes in and supports people. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I guess we have a lot of supporters as people come to know what we're doing. We're triaging and giving food from the car park because with COVID, there's no job keeper, job seeker payments for people, on bridging visas and those with no visas, obviously. People on temporary visas on the 3 or the 5 year have access to special benefit. Yeah, so this hub has kind of been a one-stop shop. There was an agency that had brokered some Queensland government funding, so we have funded agencies who use our hub and come here pre-COVID. Hopefully they'll kind of come back, soon. And they include Rails, who provide legal support, Red Cross, who gives emergency relief, and Red Cross also has funding for employment. We've got QPass comes on the weekend. We've got World Wellness Nurse Advocate that comes on a Thursday. So Queensland is quite unique. If you don't have a Medicare card, you can still access medical help through GPs, through the hospital. So we're quite unique, and thanks to the Queensland government for even that funding and for recognising that not everyone, at some stage can get access to a Medicare card. So we're kind of a one-stop shop, I suppose. And some people come here just for friendship and hospitality. Yes. Pre-COVID, during COVID, it's all kind of different, right? We're not serving afternoon tea and all that kind of stuff. But hopefully we'll get back to normal, whatever normal is soon. But it's kind of been, one-stop shop, and we're very grateful to all the donations. I mean, sometimes somebody will just ring me or ring Freddie and push $500 into my hand, and then we're going to buy food vouchers, that kind of thing. Yes. So we have to keep going until there's no need for it. We're really quite happy to shut down when there's no need for it, but I can't see that in the near future, actually.
No, not at all. It might be helpful if you explain to people the difference between the terminology, because I think, people kind of confuse what's a migrant, a refugee, an asylum seeker. Can you talk to that?
Yeah, sure. So a migrant is somebody who chooses to travel to another country for whatever purpose. It could be to study, it could be to work, to get married, family reunion, be with their families. An asylum seeker is somebody who's fled their country because of persecution. That could be religious, it could mean they're stateless, political asylum, and they have not yet gone through a legal process to determine refugee status. And a refugee is somebody who's, fled like an asylum seeker, but who's gone through a legal process and has had the status of a refugee. Now, mind you, there's about 70 million displaced people in the world at the moment.
70.
70?
Yeah.
70. And of which, there's a huge number of people displaced internally, even within their own countries, and there's refugees as well. So that's kind of the terminology. I guess another thing that I like to kind of talk about, the misinformation, is that there's a queue. Yes. Australia has an offshore humanitarian program. We're taking 13,750 or thereabouts, although it's kind of slowing now because of COVID as well. And so many people say, people come by boat, they're not queuing. Well, if there was Australia, the reality is Australia cherry picks whom they want. So if there was indeed a queue of, 13,500 people, for example, we could kind of say, okay, well, 13,000 people kind of line up and we'll take the first 13,000. It's not like that. Every year Australia will kind of choose who they want. They might say, I'll take 1,000 Afghans, I'll take 15,000 or 5,000 Syrians or Iraqis, and so on and so forth. So for many people who find themselves, for a start, it's difficult to apply for protection in your home country. So you have to kind of fly out, or you have to go to another country in some cases. You can't even get a visa to come to Australia. it's really hard to get a visa to fly in. Of course, there are people who are able to do that, who come here and then apply for protection. But for our kind of the group of people that we are seeing from Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Burma, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, it's quite difficult to get a visa. So what do you do when you have to flee? You have to flee, and if you have to flee by boat, then you have to flee by boat, you know. And there are boats that come directly from some countries, because there's another, misinformation that says, oh, people go through first and second countries, and why don't they stay there? Well, the transit countries of Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand have thousands of refugees, and Australia's not resettling them, or resettling them very, very slowly. So if I go back to the model that I worked in from 79 to 81, generally speaking, people made their way to one of the 4 refugee camps in the countries I mentioned, and they would wait up to 2 years. And people would wait, and then they'll be resettled. People have hope. People kind of know that there will be something at the end of it.
Yes.
And they'll wait, but not for 10 years, not for 15 years, and...
Is that as a direct result of policy shifts and policy changes here in Australia, that people are expected to wait for a very, very long time?
Yeah, but it's also the transit countries, So the 3 countries in particular, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand, are not signatories, but they host thousands and thousands of refugees. So we kind of need to be doing something if we're a good global citizen and kind of resettle people from there. Yes. Because if you don't do that, the backlog becomes backlog after backlog. And we just, 2 weeks ago, there was a young Afghan boy who died in Indonesia. He died by suicide because he's been waiting and waiting and waiting. And this is not unusual. People just wait, and there's no sense of resettlement.
And it sounds like, I'm getting a sense of you're taking away people's hope because there is no sense of resettlement, so you're stuck.
That's right, I know the world has changed from 79 to 81. You're not going to be able to get the 5 resettlement countries to come together and agree, that kind of stuff. But I guess, Australia likes to consider itself in Southeast Asia, right? So we're part of Asia. So we kind of need to do something in Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand so that people will not get on the boat to come here because they're so desperate.
Yes.
And we suddenly have capacity to take, 50,000, why miserable 14,000? Yes. We really have capacity. If you talk to some of the regional towns, they just want people to go there. Yes. And not everybody wants to live in Melbourne, Sydney, and Brisbane, really. Yeah, people are happy to kind of go to regional towns and make friends and, start their life there. And we certainly have capacity to do that.
I'm wondering if that's a good place to perhaps leave this first discussion, and really looking forward to having more discussions with you and really unpacking some of the lessons learned around some of the policies and that kind of stuff. So can I thank you very much, Rebecca, for taking the time to share your experiences with us and also your passion and your hope. So thank you.
Thanks, Fatina. Look forward to the next discussion.